Now, in this lecture, we will see how this servlet is working. As discussed in the previous lecture, see that a servlet programming and their usage in depth. It serves the user request based on HTTP request and response object. How the request is sending to servlet and how the servlet is passing the request and how the response is sending the user. Okay, we will see it hands-on. Let's see now. We've seen that how to create a project structure in the previous lecture. Now see that as we discussed, there are three life cycle methods in it. Service can be do post, do get, and destroy method. Before you go that, let's understand that when we create a class, it is just forget about this first part right now. Second part, what is the syntax of this creating a class? Servlet class is, it is as good as our normal Java class syntax, right? With modifier, access modifier, and the class name. To extend, to get the functionality of this servlet, what you do, you have to extend, which means you are extending the servlet functionality. So that is the reason you have to use keyword extend and extend HTTP servlet. It is a abstract class. You look at this, clicking on this, and you could see this, right? Public abstract class javax.servlet.http.http servlet. This is the name of this class, which in turn extending the generic servlet, which is again a class class. In this generic servlet internally implements that servlet interface. It contains only one method. Here, as we already know that abstract class behavior and its implementation, right? If abstract class is extending some of another abstract class, then you will have these methods in this class as well as this class. This class contains this generic servlet is abstract class. It is a class which implements the service method, and this HTTP servlet contain additional methods. What methods are there? You can see this line. Right? HTTP, do get, do post, and all this. Right? So, do head, right? We will see that HTTP servlet methods. See, this HTTP methods of HTTP servlet class are this. The service method is there. From where this service method from coming from the generic servlet. And in this current HTTP servlet, this HTTP servlet have all these methods. Do get, do post, do head, do options, do put, do trace, delete. All these methods are part of this servlet. As you can see, this head, delete, get, options, all this, the method names. That this is a class file, that's why you could not see the complete code here. So basically, all these methods are available in this HTTP servlet. Now, which method you want to use that, then it is up to us. Now, here you see that the main we say, right, there are no abstract method, then we can take. You see all the methods in your class. If your class extend the HTTP servlet, means this HTTP servlet contain all this list of methods, right? Then obviously you'll have access all these methods in your class. Then you decide that according to your requirement, which method you want to use. If you want to use do get or do post, which method you want. If you want to post the data, right, then you want to post, and otherwise you can do get. So depending on the requirement, you can go ahead. So extending the class which extend the HTTP servlet, then only your class will have the servlet functionality. Otherwise, then you will, this class can be treated as normal class. Okay, now what this is up to this point. Now we have already talked about the deployment descriptor. So where is that guy? That guy will be in the web app folder. Inside that there is a web.xml. You see this one? Initially this does not contain anything. This contain only the section of web app and this welcome file list. Later, we have to write this servlet mapping code. What is this? This contains mainly two sections minimum. One is the servlet and servlet mapping for every servlet. So in this servlet section, we have to give the name alias as the name of the servlet. You can give that your XYZ, PQR, X something, no matter, but should be some meaningful. This is the just alias, that name of this servlet. It's not the original name of this servlet. So we call what actually this servlet is doing. So this servlet is doing some login process. That's why we can say login. So where is this servlet exists? In this package where just say this is the package structure. If you click this one, then this guy is the one exist here. So I have to give the class name. Then what you do, you have to map that. I told you, right? If you look at this diagram, when the client send the request, it has to invoke the servlet, the right servlet. How we decide? Based on the servlet mapping. So what is the name of the servlet? So name of the servlet is identified with the slash. So in this URL, what we could see first this slash, right? Login. Who is the guy to serve this request? Which servlet is associated to this pattern? This is the URL pattern. This is the end of the URL. We could say this based on the pattern. It is identified the servlet container. Look at this. What is the servlet name associated to this one? The name associated, then it will call the servlet component. Hey guys, there is some pattern coming with this name, and who is the servlet? Then it goes here. Yes, I have the matching name to this one. If you have something here and something here, this will not work. Okay. Now this login is there, and this guy will invoke the servlet component and say there is a matching servlet login. Yeah. Then it will invoke the servlet container, invoke this again servlet, and then it delegate the request for this. Then the life cycle methods get started. And not I told you, right, that init method will call once for the life of a servlet. No matter how many times you invoke this servlet, it never look at this guy. It look only once, and this method will be keep invoking a number of times as the user send the request. And one more question here: is servlet a thread safe? Yes, obviously it is a thread safe. How do you say that it's a thread safe? And real-time scenario, you see that the same servlet can be served for n number of some hundreds, thousands, lakhs of users request also, which means a separate thread is created for every user request. In that thread, a copy of the servlet logic will be executed. That's why we say the servlet is a thread safe. No one request will be interference with other request. Every user is invoking the same login, but it works on their own copy. Means the separate thread is created for every request. Let's take an example of a login online banking, or even we can call any e-commerce application, right? Flipkart, Amazon, e-card, anything, right? In same time, some at least hundreds, thousands of users are logging to that Amazon or this e-commerce application, right? They don't have separate server for each request, every request. The same login component is used for all this login process. How it is handling? Because of this servlet only. There is no separate other application for this login application. Only the web where user is accessing that, either it is a mobile app or anything. right? Android app or a web. If it is a web, right, the servlet is come into picture. The servlet accept the request, right, and invoke that login component. If another guy you login, then again the login component will be accessible. When separate threads are creating for every request, each user request. So that's why servlet is a thread safe. Now let's talk about this life cycle methods. Now we will see that when this life cycle methods call, how it's called. Now we'll start the application in the debug mode. Okay, then see this step by step. Now the first time, if you don't have this one, okay, delete this. Okay, right now I delete this one. Now there are two ways you can deploy this application in the Tomcat. One is click on this. Okay, you choose this during project creation. If you have already configured, this will be coming here. Suppose if you don't have that configured, then you can have this at this moment. Say select the version of the Tomcat and select the project. You have this just finish. Then our application is deployed in this Tomcat. There to run this, just right click and start run. Now I'm going to start this in the debug mode. Let's have the breakpoints here and here. And right now see how this servlet gets invoked. So how this now, this guy is started. Once you deploy, then you struck here. How do I invoke the URL? The URL is the pattern is that you always think that what is that request? How you are sending the request is HTTP first, then colon you have deployed in your local machine. You can go with the IP address or you can go with the local host. Okay, then there is a port associated to that. Now it is running on the D080 port. And what is your program? Then is a context. Say context. Every application have a context. So this is called as a context. Copy that and put it is that. Now just last. You don't know what is the first page that you want to, right? No one does that. You just access this one. Okay, open this in the browser, just click that. See the welcome page gets inbox because every application have the welcome screen that is needed. So that will be implemented as a part of our deployment descriptor. So look at this deployment descriptor. What I said, the moment I invoke this servlet, the welcome page is this index.login. So you cannot see this one index.login, right? I just see that internally I'm working, but you cannot see that. Now this is the login. Now I'm sending the request from here. This is the HTML, right, code. You could look at this HTML code, index.html. I have it two fields, email ID and the password. What type of fields? Text, right? Name, email, and password. Then I have a submit button to submit. That submit button value is login. Okay, it's fine. What happens when I click login? It has to take these values and send back to the backend and validate whether I'm the right person to log in this to access this system or not. Then who did this process for us? The servlet, because you have to send this request to the servlet. The moment you click that, you are submitting a request. Then you have to specify that what method you are invoking, right? I told you, right? What is the method that you want to invoke on the servlet? You say method name is post. Say in my servlet, there is a method name is do post. And say action. What is your action? In that servlet, you have that. Which servlet, right? You want to invoke. You are calling a method post. But which servlet has to handle this action? Then you have to specify action is login. Okay, login action. Then that this guy gets involved. Login. I'm calling a URL pattern is login. Then this associated servlet will be invoked and then start handling your request. Now we will see how it is happen. Now if we click this login, now see I started in the debug mode, right away, and see now the request has come to this one. Okay, now you see this this init servlet init method gets called once. And if you see this config parameters, right? If you have any config parameters, then you can have this call list. See, everything gets called. This standard wrap is a login. Right? Now, this config object also holds the values that you defined it here. And thus, there is a init param name value. So, if you want to read the values from the servlet.xml, right, then this config object holds that value. Okay. Now, the init method is called. Okay, that's all. You see this one? Init method call. Now, after calling the init method only, your actual service method gets called. So in this, if you look at the syntax, this guy, what is doing? It is accepting the input parameter that you are sending as a part of your HTML. Is right? What you are sending? Email and password. But email and password, how it is going as a part of this? I'm sending it as a form. I'm just saying a post method. Who is doing for me? Because this is the web request. The web server accept, right? Wrap this all this data and stored it in the request object. Because you are sending a request, it meant the submit a button and posting a data. I mean, you are sending the request. So all the values stored in the request object. This HTTP servlet again, it is an interface. You see this one abstract interface which have the method HTTP request and the response. Both are the interfaces. This method contains that method. See this, it's not only request, you can have n number of methods are there. Guess auth type, then content type, get context path, right? Local name, method, parameter, path info, everything you can get that, right? Depend on the requirement, right? If you want to get that DL host name and the remote user who is that and the server name, server path, right? Can get all this information about your web server. So this is how it is giving the servlet functionality. Now let's talk about this. What we have submitted the parameters is email and password. So this guy say request dot get parameter. So this is coming as a parameter. If you look at the syntax, this right name request dot parameter, you have to give the name exactly what you have given. Here you give an email, but if you give something wrong here, this will not be there because in that variable, in that name, you are sending the request. If I use something else, then I cannot identify because who is sending this value in the request, I don't know. So that is the reason it will not be able. See, this is the email what I have entered in the email, and this is the password. What I do, we have to validate this user is there or not. So I have written a separate method as a servlet helper. Inside that, I am firing a database query. Okay, this guy comes here and it will execute a database query and get the email password from the DB. I have already stored it here. Sorry, I will explain this about that later when we discuss JDBC concepts. No worry. Now, what you do? It select the email and password from the table login. This is the login table. You could see this is the login table and get those fields, and it checks this guy is matching to this guy. If this is matching, then I'll return true. Then you will get the output as true. Then it go inside. Then it will invoke another guy to display this one. Okay, I will tell this later. So using this method, it invoke the another guy to this say welcome to the servlet programming. Then now go back and see some wrong input. Okay, skip this breakpoints now. You see this now? Username or password incorrect, which means that the entire credentials are not matching to this. You are not the right person to log in to the system. That is why it is showing like this. Now, how all this stuff is happening? Let's now stop the server and let me go through that. What's happening behind this? Now, the moment you submit the request, what's that? It is taking the values input, email and password. then it is validating. So this is the actual logic that it submit the request to the backend and get it is returning false. And if it is a success, it is displaying in different GSP. It is failure, it is displaying the right same file in the same location. How it is happening? Then using some methods. What is that? Let's take the first success response. There is a request dispatcher. Say request dispatcher is the interface again. It contains some method get request dispatcher. Means request dispatcher means dispatch the request to another guy using the method get request dispatcher. But you have to specify, you have to tell which servlet I have to dispatch the request. And this is welcome is the one of the servlet. If you look at this .xml, say this is the welcome is the servlet. I just give the name of the URL pattern. Then it will contact this guy and associated servlet invoke. Here is the actual code. Just welcome to the servlet programming. This is how this guy is printing. Make sure again this should be also a servlet. If you don't say this is something like that, then there is no servlet matching to your URL like that, exception will come. So this is one of the requests. Means what you want to say in this using object, there is a method forward. What you are saying, you are forwarding this request and response. What is the request and the request object, this request dispatcher object, then you are forwarding the request and response. That what request you are sending, you are sending the request, you invoke that. Okay, if something I have already a response as a part of here, for example, I send some response here, then if I forward this guide, right, then the response from the response object I can print it here. Now I'm not sending any response, I just sending the request response object. Then what the data has to be displayed in the UI is already hard coded here. In real-time scenario, what happens, right? If there is a response, right, then it's in the request dot, in the request attribute we have many things are there, like request dot session attribute. Then you store all the data in that request, and then once the request object comes here, this guy will access that one. Okay. Now that we will see in the next lecture about when we are talking about the session variables. Now, if it is success, then this is what happened. Or now it is failure. Now what we do? Then we are printing this message out.println. What is out? It is a print writer. Print writer is a class, right? Where it contains the method response.getWriter. Means I'm sending the response to the browser or to the client to where the request has submitted. So using response object, you have to write that using the right method. Means you are writing the response out print using print writer class. You are sending the response. Means how do you send that? You have to write that. Write out dot using out dot println. What is the println? As we seen system dot out dot println, what it is doing? Using system class out println, it is printing in the console. What is the out object? Is the print writer. It is the browser class, means which will print on the browser. Using that object, there is a method println. In that object means where is the location you are print writing, that is the method print there, print line, and this one. And what we are doing again using request dispatcher. Now this time I have forwarded, now I'm not forwarding, I'm including. Where you are including, from where I'm including this is the login, right? Index.html contains username and password. What I'm trying to here, I'm trying to include that. Means the response, right? The response out.println is the response. I'm including the response where in the index.html page, because from here user is entering that. You could see he has seen anything, right? There is nothing to display this message, right? Right, username or password incorrect. Have I done any additional coding here? No. See, that is the magic of web server. If you are sending the response, right, response object is a object which will be there as a part of web server. Web server knows that this is the response object, HTTP servlet response object. I should display in the place where the servlet is send back return the response, right? Once it identify that HTML, right, index.html, then it start writing that response to that particular place. If this is something wrong, then it will terminate your process here, which means then this will not forward your request to that page. Then once it identify the matching page, then it successfully send the response to that location. Now, this is how the request and response of the servlet works. Now, this is that old way, means old Servlet API. Now, the Servlet from 3.x, the latest version, you no need to write all this stuff. This makes a lot of code done, right? You see this, you have to write a servlet section, servlet mapping for every servlet. In future, if you add one more servlet, again, you have to come to the deployment descriptor and then write that code for it. So instead, in the latest Servlet API, this can be removed. Don't need of this dirty code. How then? What I can do then with that? You just go here. I simply say @web servlet is the annotation introduced in servlet 3.0. Then you just say brackets slash. Then what do you want to say that? Login. Okay. Then you have to give login. There is another servlet for us, right? Then what we named it as is a welcome, right? You have given a new page. Okay, W is caps. Okay, let's change this to small w. Okay, now copy this and mark this as one of our servlet @web servlet. Now you see, simple, right? How much code is here? See this stuff, completely remove that. There's nothing in that, right? Based on the path that you have given here, right? This will automatically identify your servlet with simple that path. Everything this servlet, right? This annotation have all this stuff, what it has to do, right? You don't need to worry that. Servlet API already did this. See one description. Annotation is to declare a servlet. This annotation is processed by the container at deployment time and the corresponding servlet made available at the specified URL pattern. What pattern you are giving that? That pattern, if it matches that pattern, that corresponding servlet gets involved. Now let's see how this works. Now we already have this. Okay, let's start the application. Go back to this servlet. Let's see if this started. Okay. Now refresh. It's not there. Go back. Now submit it. See, username, password incorrect. Now enter the correct username, password, and see, welcome to the Servlet program. You see this now? Still working with this minimum changes, right? You no need to write all this stuff. It is such a big, right? A huge amount of code is needed. You no need to write all this guy. You simply go with the web servlet annotation and just give the mapping of that. You don't need to write all this stuff. See, everything got gone here. Okay, revert this back. Okay, leave it now. That's not a problem. So this is the simple way of creating a servlet and the mapping. So always remember that a servlet is also a Java class that extend the servlet functionality using extend keyword with the help of HTTP servlet, and it contains all the methods available. You see this one: do get, do post, do put, do delete, and init and destroy. And it contains a life cycle. No matter how many servlet, every servlet have that init method. I can say you may not you place that init and destroy. It's not required. If you want to load some default config that is required once, then only I can go and override the init method. Otherwise, it is not needed. But to see the life cycle of the servlet methods, I have coded this init and destroy service method. This will be called only once. Have not seen this? How many times it is calling every time? Okay, let's debug. and see that now how many times it call. If I invoke n number of times also, it is called only once. Okay, now it started. See, it came once, right? Now our method is called. Okay, remove this one unnecessarily. Now init method is called once. Now I will submit this. I will submit the request again. See, this time what it go? It not going to this init method. It directly coming to the post method. And also you see this one, init method, right? Have you seen that? Only once it is showing here. It is not calling again and again, no matter how many times you send that. Okay. Now send this again one more time. See, it's never be calling that init method. It will be called only once. Init and destroy method will be called only once for that life cycle of a servlet. See, now stop the server. Okay, now we have stopped the server. So this is how the life cycle of a servlet works. This servlet is the main important topic and the main important component across anywhere, any web applications. Without servlet, there is no HTTP request response is servlet. That servlet should be there. Servlet must be there. Servlet programming. Everyone should be aware of this servlet programming. How this servlet is working. What is the use of this servlet? Right. A servlet programming is nothing but they used to serve user request and send the response back. But how things are working, how this life cycle methods are working, you have to understand that. Anywhere, any go, right? This you no need to write all this stuff, extending servlet, etc. etc. Going forward, right? If you see that, let us springboard, then this configuration is completely eliminated. That we can see in detail when we start using springboard lectures. Okay, right now, this is all about how to create a servlet programming. Okay, make it practice and do it. Okay, do it hands-on and understand how things are working. In the next lecture, I will show you how this session is working, HTTP session, how we can manage that session variables. Okay, then after that we'll see in some other. As of now, we'll stop.